We've heard the story a million times. The government comes to us with a new policy, promising a brighter future, promising to solve poverty, promising to fix education. But let's look at our actual track record. Time and time again, we see grand, expensive schemes launched in Indonesia that sound great, but when actually implemented, they completely fall apart when they hit real, messy economy of our nation. The student loan proposal is exactly that. It's a theory that sounds good in your mind, but practically it will actually cause more real world damage. Now, before I engage with the proposition's arguments, I would provide two pieces of vital characterization that they didn't really brush up on. Now, firstly is regarding the unrealistic approach that they are thriving to implement. Two layers regarding that. The first one is the institutional gap. The proposition keeps on trying to copy paste Singapore, but let's be real, we aren't Singapore. We're not as advanced as them. Their government knows exactly how much you make because their tax and banking systems are way more developed. But in Indonesia, most people work in small markets. They don't even have a standard tax ID that links to a bank, etc., etc. And I will be expanding more on my first argument later on. Now, second is regarding the economic reality. In the status quo, we're already dealing with very high inflation. We have massive infrastructure projects eating up our budget. Our currency is under pressure. Adding a massive, high-risk, high-funding program to a national budget that's already stretched to the limit isn't ambitious. It's very reckless and dangerous. And we've seen this play out before. In Indonesia, a program starts with huge funding. The government then gets into a debt problem or economic problem or a funding problem. Then what happens? What happens to the program and the people involving it? What happens to the students? They pull the plug halfway. They're left with debt, a half-finished degree, and a government that stopped caring about them and the program years ago. The proposition absolutely fails to provide a mechanism on how to actually keep track of this loan system. Now, to win this debate, the opposition will focus on two core clashes. The first one is regarding feasibility. Why the proposition's mechanism is actually doomed to fail in the Indonesian context, resulting in a budget drain rather than an educational success that they claim that will happen. Second is regarding impact. Why this policy actually creates a trap that hurts students more than it helps them, creating a debt cycle that stunts our economy rather than actually improving our economy, making education less affordable for the students they claim they want to help. With that, let's move on to rebuttals. Now, I will be rebutting their access argument. The Prime Minister goes on and on how this program will increase access, and access to education is very important because everyone needs education to get better jobs, etc., etc. We agree that it's important, but what is access for if we can't even guarantee the door won't slam on these students halfway? The proposition's claim of increased access is a very dangerous way of thinking that will actually leave students worse off. Now, I won't go in the full economic mechanics right now because I will be expanding on the dangers of this debt trap later in my second pillar of argument. But suffice to say, this policy is unsustainable and it doesn't create access, but rather the opposite of that, it creates abandonment. Now, on their human resource argument, they claim that this program will improve human resources, but we argue it actually stunts economic mobility. And I will proving why this mechanism is very dangerous administratively in my first argument. But for now, let's just understand that a degree in a low-skill job market doesn't equal prosperity, but actually only equals more debt. Now, I'll move on to my arguments. The opposition's case rests on two main pillars. The first pillar is regarding the institutional responsibility, and the second will be regarding the economic practicality. Now, the first pillar. This pillar will argue that the state has a moral duty to prioritize stability over reckless experimentation. Two layers regarding that. The first layer is the context mismatch. The government attempt to transplant a Singaporean loan model into Indonesia is very much a fundamental failure of governance because Singapore relies on high trust, fully digitized tax system to track income, while Indonesia doesn't have that. Indonesia's workforce or labor force is mostly informal, like gig workers who operate entirely outside of bank-linked payrolls, etc., etc. Because the state cannot track this income, the mechanism is not income contingent as they claim, but it's more administratively impossible. Trying to enforce payment on a gig worker is not just difficult, but it's very impossible and very difficult to do. A policy that ignores the structural reality of their own citizens is not a good policy. It's not a good solution. It's a breach of the state's duty to provide actual workable and implementative policies. Now, second is regarding the breach of public trust. They say with this program, it ensures our citizens actually stay in the country and help the country and not them leaving to another country to pursue education. But we argue it will be the opposite of that. This policy will inevitably lead to the collapse of faith in the Indonesian government. Why? Because when the government launches high-profile projects that are abandoned mid-cycle due to budget problems and funding problems, they don't just lose money, but they lose something arguably more important than that, which is the trust of the next generation and the generation after that. Students will be left with high debt and a half-finished degree because the government stopped funding the program to save the national budget. And history is full of Indonesian curriculum reforms that were pulled halfway, leaving students confused and very much disappointed in their nation. It's better to have a reliable scholarship that they claim is very competitive, but it's actually better because this system is reliable than a promising loan system that leaves students more resentful and more abandoned. Now, I will move on to my second layer regarding the practicality of economic stability. Now, this pillar will argue that this policy is actually a trap that destabilizes our nation. Now, firstly, I have two layers regarding that. Firstly is the wealth illusion. When students receive these loans, they experience a false sense of financial security. They spend more, and local businesses will respond by raising prices across the board. This will create a ripple effect. This wealth illusion triggers a demand pull inflation across the broader economy, not just the students and the university, etc., etc. The students who receive government-backed loans suddenly have a large amount of liquid credit because they don't yet understand the long-term cost of that debt. They experience a wealth illusion and they feel richer than they actually are. And when students start spending this money on non-educational goods like housing, food, electronics, etc., local businesses and service notice that the sudden spike in demand, and sellers in areas surrounding universities know that their student population has access to this new money, so they hike their prices. And this isn't just about tuition inflation or the cost of students, but it's the cost of living for everyone. When rent and basic necessities rise around university towns, it forces everyone, including non-students, to pay more, further devaluating the rupiah and actually worsening the inflation that we're already facing in the status quo. Now, the proposition's policy is essentially an inflationary engine because it pumps fake liquidity into the hands of students who are not yet economically literate, causing a localized price explosion that hurts the broader community. Now, second layer is regarding the job market trap. This policy forces students into a debt trap because Indonesian job markets lack the high-skill roles required to support these repayments. Now, the proposition assumes a degree equals a high-paying job, but the reality is Indonesia's job market is dominated by low-skill and low-paid work. And the degree is only a human resource, and if there's an economy to support it, but if there's not, without high-skill job growth, the loan is just a debt trap that actually stunts the potential of our youth. On the proposition side, we have good intentions but very bad execution. They offer a policy that ignores the reality of economy, inflation, etc., etc. They're gambling the future of our next generation. While on opposition, we offer stability for students, for university, for the government, protecting them from debt traps, protecting market volatility, and to ensure that funding is sustainable, and we protect national budget from a cycle that has ruined countless programs before. That is why, for the betterment of our students, for university, and the integrity of Indonesia, we strongly